Come, learn the dangers of lending your house key to a ghost.
Feel a cool breeze generated purely by thought.
Witness a woman chased by love-struck furniture.
All this and more haunted history, strange science, and paranormal perplexities.
Feel the invigoration.
Feel the levitation.
Feel the psychokinetic boosting power of Odd Tonic.
Welcome to the parlor. I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Maxwell.
Please join us on the settee. We've been reading lovely letters sent to us by our listeners.
Odd Tonic is still but in short pants, and already we are receiving missives from far off and distant lands.
Ooh, I feel so continental.
We have correspondence from Germany, Scotland, and one has come to us from a guest in Wales. He says that he is enjoying the podcast, despite the fact that he's a self-described skeptic and has never experienced anything paranormal or inexplicable in his life.
Then his listening to our podcast could be considered inexplicable. So thank you very much for listening.
He asks us, in short, do you think one's belief or lack of belief can directly influence one's experience or lack of experience of the paranormal?
I think this is a wonderful question.
Me too.
First off, since we rely on our senses to navigate through life, I think people generally trust only what they can see and touch and such. Mm-hmm. It seems reliable and consistent to the point that it becomes this assumption that we all have the same set of senses.
Right.
Which is funny because people don't even experience the flavor of cilantro consistently or their perception of colors.
And you know, I am always impressed by your superhuman sense of smell.
I'm a Wolverine.
Hey, to riff on what you're saying about inconsistency of experience and perception, I have often thought about how out in Ithaca, New York, astronomer Carl Sagan wanted so badly to meet an extraterrestrial. Meanwhile, at the same time in upstate New York, Whitley Strieber would have done anything to stop the extraterrestrials from abducting him. So how does one account for that?
Oh, I think there are multiple layers. Does mindset play a factor in some aspects of the paranormal? I think so. Think of psychic abilities. Some people have them as part of their natural senses and others just don't.
Right.
Could those people who don't have a psychic sense learn the ability? I mean, it depends. Do they believe it's possible to learn? Do they believe that psychic abilities exist? As with the learning of any skill, I think mindset can really be key.
That, my love, is a terrific segue as we continue to explore belief, mindset, and the paranormal in this evening's story, a tale of strange science conducted in Toronto, Canada in the early 1970s.
Welcome, dear guest, to the Philip Experiment.
It's midsummer, 1973. 8 people sit together in a room around a small card table. They are all members of the Toronto Society of Psychical Research and come from a mix of backgrounds, including a former chairperson of Mensa, an industrial designer, a heating engineer, and an accountant. 3 men and 5 women. They have consistently gathered every week for the past year with one goal: to conjure and witness the ghostly apparition of a 17th century aristocrat named Philip Aylesford. Without much success. Although a few times, all members noticed a mysterious mistiness around the center of the table.
Maybe someone was partaking in the 1970s recreational buffet.
It was stated that smoking was not allowed until after the meeting. What they smoked was not recorded. However, little else developed over the year, other than a very warm, very close bond of friendship within the group. But tonight may be different. Inspired by techniques used by researchers in England, tonight the group is changing their routine and taking another approach. The bright overhead lights are dimmed to create an atmospheric mood. They exchange their quiet meditation and rigid focus for relaxing, laughing, and singing together. They joke around and playfully make demands of the ghost. Intriguingly, there is a new occurrence. Through their fingertips, which were all placed lightly on the tabletop, they feel odd, soft vibrations ripple through the table's surface. It's nothing dramatic, to be sure, but it's enough to make everyone look forward to the next session. And indeed, during the following session and those subsequent, extraordinary things began to happen. Iris Owen, group member and society secretary-treasurer, explains in her own words.
We were surprised when suddenly one night we heard a rap from the table, quite a loud rap, and we thought, what is this? And we sat there very much surprised, and I think it was Dorothy said, well, perhaps it's Philip. And immediately there was another rap. And so we said, well, rap once for yes and two for no. Are you Philip? And there was another rap. And so this did surprise us very much.
The rapping is quite distinctly occurring in the center of the table, with everyone's fingertips in view on the tabletop and independent observation confirming all feet are firmly on the deeply carpeted floor.
Shag. Orange shag carpeting, you know it. 1973.
A personality begins to emerge through the knocks. When the group sings particular songs, especially those associated with the period that Philip lived in, the table responds with louder and more obvious raps. A forceful series of knocks come during songs he approves of, and very soon, Philip adopts the habit of actually beating time to his favorite songs. Sessions begin with each member individually saying, "Hello, Philip," and as a response, a loud knock is heard and felt under each of their hands. Sessions close the same way with their goodbyes. With every question asked, Philip reveals his likes and dislikes, his habits and customs, and responds exactly one would expect of a mid-1600s cavalier. A remarkable outcome, but that's not the whole story. More remarkable yet, and somewhat disruptive to the standard narrative, is the fact that aristocrat Philip Aylesford never existed. This table-knocking entity, so full of interactive personality, is one that has been carefully and deliberately conjured completely from the imagination of the group.
A bit of background. The Society for Psychical Research began in the United Kingdom in 1882, during the height of the spiritualist movement. It comprised of people from a variety of beliefs and eminent backgrounds, including a renowned chemist, a physicist, a psychologist, a professor of moral philosophy, and a Nobel laureate, and was the first society to conduct organized scholarly research into human experiences that challenge contemporary scientific models. Spiritualists praised and joined the group until SPR's diligent research had them exposing and in some cases duplicating fake phenomena of the many popular fraudulent mediums of the time. Ooh. Ironically, an indignant Arthur Conan Doyle led a mass resignation of 84 members of the SPR as they believed the society was opposed to spiritualism. One would think then that SPR would have been the darlings of scientists. Not so. Skeptics accused SPR of having impaired scientific objectivity. SPR would indeed state that their collective minds were open to accept that some phenomenon could be real and unexplained by current science. Their mission was, through methodical rigor, to investigate the paranormal, expose its fraud, investigate what remained, and examine what might lie behind it. The Toronto SPR group was no different. Nearly a decade before, Iris Owen's husband, mathematician Dr. George Owen, published a book proclaiming, Toronto SPR research suggests that poltergeist activity is not a result of paranormal phenomena. Now you're talking, said scientists who sat down to listen. No, said George. Poltergeists are manifestations by the observer's unchecked and completely unconscious power of psychokinesis. At which point the scientists threw their slide rulers to the ground and left. Owen's 1964 book, Can We Explain the Poltergeist?, had been a springboard for the Philip experiment, which asked, if psychokinesis is real and its unconscious use could manifest an unruly entity, can a small group's conscious use of psychokinesis manifest a polite one? No one involved in the Philip experiment, later known as the Owen group, professed to have any psychic ability whatsoever. So it was, somehow, going to have to be learned.
Which now brings us back to the top of our story. The same small group of 8 people began a weekly meeting in which they created and focused on an invented character named Philip Aylesford. In his detailed backstory, Philip was an aristocratic Englishman living in the middle 1600s. His marriage to Dorothea, the daughter of a neighboring nobleman, was a cold and distant one. One day, when writing the boundaries of his estates, Philip came across a beautiful gypsy girl, Margot, and they fell instantly in love. He brought her back to secretly live in the gatehouse of his home, Diddington Manor.
Diddington Manor. An appropriately named place for a sordid English affair.
Eventually, Dorothea found them out and accused Margot of stealing her husband through witchcraft. Philip, too concerned over social and financial losses, didn't protest at the trial, and Margot was burned at the stake. Inconsolable with guilt and despair, Philip's body was soon found where he had cast himself from atop the battlements. Once the story was agreed upon by the group, a hand-drawn portrait of Philip was created.
Oh, did they hire one of those police suspect artists? Is this the ghost you saw, ma'am?
And photos of the real Diddington Manor farm in Cambridgeshire, England, were placed around the room. In addition to quiet meditation, their meetings were spent discussing Philip in detail. The reason behind all this? For the group to convince themselves that Philip had been an actual living person, so that experiencing his ghost would be entirely possible. For, in one word, belief. Give or take a strange, unexplained mist, the group suspected that something was missing in their effort to tap into strong psychokinetic ability. After a diligent year of these meetings, it was discovered that similar work by a man named Kenneth Batcheldor had been done in England during the previous 10 years. Batcheldor, and later Colin Brooke Smith and his associates, were specifically interested in producing physical phenomena, such as table levitation and raps. But the Owen group wondered if a similar approach might also work in the creation of Philip. Batcheldor recommended an approach more closely approximating the old type of seances as performed during the Victorian era.
Were there corsets? I'm in.
He suggested an atmosphere of joviality and relaxation, with songs, jokes, and encouragement of the table to obey the sitter's commands. Batcheldor's papers gave reasoning as to why this method worked. He explained that the brain needed to be psychologically trained for manifestation to work. Batcheldor noted that physical phenomena started with the mind, and that there was a relationship between experiment results and positive attitude among participants. For instance, success tended to breed more success, as participants believed that repeating the conditions that achieved success would lead to more of the same.
It's just such a fascinating idea. I love it.
The Owen group decided to give Batcheldor's approach a try, and by their second session, the rapping that Iris Owen described earlier had begun. The raps moved around the table, often appearing to come from underneath or within it. They were just as loud and prolific if the group stood around the table. With the introduction of the knocking, The group had adopted the practice of addressing the table as Philip to hone the group's single point of focus. And to test physical factors, several other tables were experimented with, and, impressively, the same results were achieved. Through the knocks, 1 rap for yes, 2 for no, a personality formed, recreating the character of Philip as dictated by the group's written backstory. Interestingly, although he could accurately answer questions about events and people of his time period, Philip only seemed to own the knowledge that the group itself knew. In other words, Philip's responses were coming from their own minds, and he never gave them any information that someone in the group didn't already know. After 4 weeks of rap-filled gatherings, the group met again, and things took an unexpected turn. Again, Iris Owen explains.
Shortly afterwards, the table kind of slid a bit. Right. And, of course, then we all accused each other of pushing it, naturally. We couldn't believe that it would move. And, in fact, the first few months we were watching each other like hawks, and if anybody's finger moved the slightest bit, you're pushing, this sort of thing.
The table had begun moving. Remember, the floor was thickly carpeted. Iris acknowledged that in ordinary circumstances it was very difficult to move the table by pushing it across the carpet, and yet it slid around the room in random directions, causing the group to rise from their chairs and follow it. It would move into corners, forcing most of the group to break their contact, and then it would shoot across the room at great speed, so that it was sometimes difficult to keep up with it. When it came to rest, the sitters, now standing around the table, would continue their questions, and the raps would come just as forcibly and intelligently. The table's personality continued to unfold, much to the group's amusement. Soft raps occurred when Philip was unsure or doubtful. He began showing his preferences, likes and dislikes, and particular fondness for certain members of the group. He was also a prankster, displayed by his penchant for chasing one of the members. On one occasion, the member in question said goodnight and left the room. She soon returned, having left her jacket. The table slid across the floor in a playful effort to prevent her from getting her jacket several times.
Wow.
When the jacket was finally procured, she ran from the room laughing, while the table whooshed across the room in chase.
Now that's just getting freaky.
I would have loved to witness that. At times, Philip showed a tendency to sulk at something he did not like, but then would become very noisy and appreciative of songs or jokes he approved of. On one occasion, on a hot evening, the table had been particularly vigorous, and the group had been trying to persuade Philip to lift the table, as in the Brooks Smith experiments. After several unsuccessful attempts, one of the members said, "Well, Philip, if you're not hot and tired, we are. Why don't you just flip over and we'll have a glass of lemonade and rest?" Whereupon the table immediately tilted, and with all hands on top of the table, it gave a curious little flip and it landed completely upside down with all 4 legs in the air. Dear guest, the tale of Philip the Imaginary Ghost has just begun. When we return, Philip adds new confounding tricks to his arsenal and becomes a television star.
You're listening to Odd Tonic. Don't wander off into the dark woods. We'll be back after a spot of tea.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you're enjoying the strangeness that is the Philip experiment.
More tea, love?
Yes, please. We would like to thank Apothecary Teas for sending us their delicious Star-Crossed Lovers tea collection. It's a fitting choice for Odd Tonic as it is such a charming oddity itself.
The Star-Crossed Lovers collection comes with 3 teas, romantically named Romeo, Juliet, and Fated. And each is an alluring blend of, are you ready? Loose leaf tea and coffee beans.
They're wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Juliet tea. It's probably one of the more sophisticated teas I've ever tried. It's bold and rich from the coffee, but delicate and floral too. Kind of how I like my romance.
It is delicious.
Love is, or the tea?
Yes.
And Apothecary Teas has a delectable collection of other handcrafted loose-leaf teas, including black, oolong, rooibos, herbal teas, and more.
Struggle with indecision? Apothecary Teas makes it easy for you with their Tea of the Month Club. Receive 1 3-ounce blend every month with free shipping and a special gift one of the months. But which one will it be?
And it's customizable with no duplicates, so you will always get the tea you want.
Dear guest, we invite you to discover your new favorite tea at apothecaryteastore.com.
And use the code Odd Tonic at checkout and receive a magical 10% off your order. That's apothecaryteastore.com and use promo code Odd Tonic, all one word.
And now, back for more Odd Tonic.
Welcome back. We've been discussing the Philip experiment, a fascinating true story of a group of researchers who conjured a ghost of their own invention, a 17th century aristocrat named Philip Aylesford. Had there been no other witnesses to the Philip experiment, the story would have been difficult to believe. But there were, many startled and gobsmacked ones. In fact, the response to the experiment was so fantastic that in January of 1974, a short documentary of the experiment was made. This delighted Toronto SPR as they hoped to dispose any allegations that the phenomena was subjective or the result of mass hallucination. Although the Owen group was a bit concerned over having to perform under the light of film cameras and in front of strangers, Philip, it seemed, was ready for his close-up. He successfully produced raps and movements entirely to order. Later, a talk show panel with Dr. Owen, Dr. Whitten, and a local United Church minister, the Reverend Lindsay King, was arranged. Ooh, a talk show panel. Was it Oprah? And you get a ghost, and you get a ghost, and you... The Owen group sat at a table in the corner of the studio ready to perform if Philip would make an appearance. And of course he did. The group was beginning to realize that there was nothing Philip liked more than to appear in public, and the bigger the audience, the better. Such a ham. I can relate. Philip quickly made it obvious that he felt his place was on the stage with the speakers panel rather than in the corner of the studio. His efforts to climb the stage and take his rightful place were a showstopper. Both audience and studio staff were in fits of laughter as the table lifted first one leg and then the other and then swung around, wiggling and pushing to get in the forefront of the show.
Wow.
Eventually it succeeded, and the moderator, Reverend Lindsay King, who had been watching with some amusement, was asked to walk over and say hello to Philip. He did so, and a very loud rap in response came from the table, right underneath his hand. His facial expression was of complete surprise. Until then, he had not really believed in the phenomena. He carried on a conversation for several minutes, and the table, as Philip, responded with loud and clear raps. The show was so successful that the Canadian television station regularly replayed it. Later in the year, at the special request of Toronto SPR's president, Alan Spraggett, the Philip Group gave a similar performance for Spraggett's TV show. The highlight of this performance was that the table flipped upside down completely, and when the group knelt around it, a lowered boom mic recorded the rapping loudly and clearly from the table.
No more really could have been expected from Philip and the Owen group. But Philip had a couple more tricks up his sleeve. On a very hot night, the Owen group decided to concentrate their energies on producing a cool breeze, and, to their utter amazement, felt a gentle breeze starting to drift from the center of the table. They were wondering whether this was, in fact, entirely subjective when Dr. Owen walked into the room. "Put your hand in the middle of the table and tell us if you feel anything," said one in the group. George did so and remarked, "It feels like a cool breeze, as if a fan were blowing."
Independent confirmation.
Gotta love that. The Owen group also became interested in metal bending, and in November, a light metal medallion was placed on the table, and Philip was asked to bend it. It was left there during the evening, and the group members did not touch it. At the end of the evening, it was slightly bent at the edges. The group felt a little disappointed and left it lying on the table when they went out. The group members went straight upstairs and left, and when George Owen entered the room to empty the ashtrays, he noticed the medallion completely crumpled up. Well, as he had not attended that evening's meeting, he actually thought the medallion was a discarded chocolate wrapper. Iris went downstairs the next morning and found it, still completely crumpled. The following week, under the same conditions, a key was bent slightly, but unlike the medallion, it did not continue to bend after the group left. The group discontinued the metal bending attempts until January 1975, when the group was visited by Bill Dampier, a journalist from the National Enquirer. "Will you try and bend my house key?" he asked. The group somewhat reluctantly agreed to try, but warned him that it might not work. A professional photographer was present, taking pictures continually. After half an hour, the key was bent very slightly, but quite obviously. The interview ended. Dampier replaced the key in his pocket and bid them adieu. The next day, about 3 p.m., he telephoned to say that he had had difficulty getting his front door open the previous night, owing to the amount the key was bent. And now it had bent considerably more, so much that he had sent for the photographer to come and take another picture of it in its present state. Which brings us to our last story. In December of 1974, the Philip Group was invited to Cleveland, Ohio, to demonstrate before a group of psychologists and physicists. Unfortunately, being just before Christmas, only 4 of the group could go. However, it appeared not to matter. The table used there was an antique, heavy wooden chess table with wheels on casters, one of which was broken. The other 3 needed oiling and squeaked when the table was pushed. Nevertheless, the table glided around the carpeted floor without the wheels squeaking and without making track marks on the carpet. On 2 occasions, one of the men present sat on the table and was thrown off, once quite violently. Also, a drawer in the table, which fell out very easily under normal conditions when the table was moved around, did not budge at all when Philip was moving it. It was a grand demonstration. So much so that some of the physicists declared that they had to completely rethink their theories on physics. In her account of the Philip experiment in a research journal article, Iris Owen states, "In the Philip experiment, several basic points emerged. One does have to implicitly believe that the phenomena can happen and will happen and not be surprised when something unusual does happen. A.K. Talbot says the psychical researcher, while carrying out his investigation, cannot afford the luxury of a neutral and unbiased attitude. He should, quote, adopt a wholehearted acceptance of the phenomena, regardless of how much this deliberate act of acceptance may outrage his intellectual convictions. The attitude which Talbot thinks appropriate is illustrated in the reaction of the Brooks Smith and Hunt group when a chair moved telekinetically. The watchers did not react with astonishment, but rather in speculation on how to use the manifested force."
Can this help me clean the house?
Brooks Smith says that the group exhibited psychological poise, and that such poise appears to be necessary for this type of experiment. Owen goes on to say, the Philip experiment produced results well beyond everyone's expectations, and, in the end, the group of 8 concluded that the materialization of Philip was produced by their own collective consciousness. It's quite easy to find more research and results from other groups inspired by our experiment, with the same supporting theory that, and we direct this last statement to our friend in Wales, that the human mind can produce the effect of spirit communication through expectation, imagination, and visualization. It does occur to me, darling, if the Philip experiment originally set out to create an apparition, wasn't it technically a failure then?
Shh.
But if their original intent...
Look into my eyes. Shh.
But the whole thing...
I'm not taking any questions right now. Well, that wraps up another edition of Odd Tonic. We hope this episode has helped prime your brain for some serious psychokinesis. Remember to subscribe so you never miss a show, and leave us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast app so that your kindred odd may find us too.
This is, dear guest, goodbye for now. But remember, when the lively dinner party you're attending gathers for a jovial aperitif, and you hear a sudden, distinct, and incessant rapping coming from inside the table, as your silver dinner fork slowly bends and curls around itself, don't worry.
It's just us.
Good night.